My family thinks I'm jobless. That's the story they tell each other about me. The shadow they cast over my name whenever it comes up. Hillary still hasn't figured her life out. She's drifting. She's 33 and still not settled. They use words like unemployed, unstable, dreamer, but the truth is, they have no idea who I've become or what I've built. Tonight, they're holding what they've labeled an emergency meeting about my future. I can picture them already. My father rehearsing speeches in his head, my mother with that sympathetic frown she wears like a mask, my brother with his legal pads full of options he thinks will save me, and my sister scanning job boards to offer me entry-level opportunities. They think they're rescuing me, but here's the secret that none of them see coming. I don't need saving. I just closed a deal to sell my company for over $1.5 billion. Saying that out loud even here feels strange. For years, I've hidden this part of myself from them, keeping my wins quiet, deflecting their questions, pretending to nod along while they dismissed me as the family's lost cause. I swallowed my pride at holiday dinners. I smiled when they asked if I needed money. I let them believe I was fragile because it was easier than trying to shout over the chorus of doubt. But inside, I was building something real, something strong, something that could stand on its own without their approval. And now the moment has come. Tonight I will walk into that living room, sit in the chair they've probably set aside for me like a defendant awaiting trial, and let them talk. I'll let them lay out their plans, their interventions, their pity, and then at exactly 7:15, my phone will ring. On the other end will be my assistant Maya, her voice steady and clear, confirming the deal that will shatter every assumption my family has ever made about me. Imagine this with me. Imagine being treated like a disappointment for years, and then having the proof in your hands that not only were they wrong, but you've succeeded on a level that outshines their wildest expectations. It's not about revenge, it's about release. It's about finally setting the record straight without having to raise your voice, letting the truth do the talking. My hands are steady now, steadier than they've been in years, because the power isn't in convincing them anymore, it's in knowing who I am, regardless of what they think. The irony is, I never needed their validation to succeed, but tonight, when the truth comes crashing down on them, I'll finally get to watch their version of me dissolve. So, here's my confession. Raw and unfiltered. My family believes I'm unemployed, a burden, someone they have to fix. But the reality? I've built a company, I've sold it for billions, and I've proven, to myself most of all, that their labels mean nothing. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever sat quietly while people dismissed you, this story is for you. Stay with me, because by the end of tonight, you'll see exactly how their world turned upside down and why I'll never again measure my worth by their eyes. I was born into a family where success wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. In our apartment overlooking Central Park, every wall seemed to carry proof of achievement. Framed diplomas, polished awards, photographs of smiling faces shaking hands at banquets. My father, a renowned cardiologist, kept his medical degrees displayed in gold frames above the fireplace. Guests would marvel at them, and he would nod with quiet pride. My mother, a literature professor, had entire shelves lined with her published papers and first editions. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades lecturing in ivy-covered halls. Then there were my siblings. My older brother Michael was the family's golden child, a corporate lawyer with a sharp jawline and sharper suits. He walked into every room as if the world already agreed with him. My sister Caroline, just 2 years older than me, was the financial wizard. She had climbed her way into an investment firm so prestigious that even their business cards seemed to weigh more than mine. She spoke in numbers, percentages, and forecasts, and people listened. In my family, introductions were rehearsed like performances. This is Dr. Rosen, head of cardiology. This is Professor Rosen, tenured at Columbia. This is Michael, our lawyer. This is Caroline. She's in finance. And then there was me, Hillary, the one who was still figuring things out. The afterthought, the sigh at the end of the sentence. You see, in a family like mine, identity wasn't built on who you were. It was built on what you achieved. It was an unspoken rule that if you didn't have a title, you didn't have value. The rhythm of our dinners followed a predictable script. Someone would recount a triumph, a patient saved, a deal closed, a paper accepted for publication. And then eyes would turn to me, waiting for something I couldn't or wouldn't offer. I'd smile weakly, push food around my plate, and endure the silence that followed. I can still hear my father's voice during those evenings, deep, authoritative, tinged with disappointment whenever I opened my mouth. So, Hillary, what are you doing these days? It was never a genuine question. It was a test. And no matter how I answered, I failed. My mother would rescue the moment with a change of subject, but the damage was always done. The truth is, I wasn't lazy. I wasn't aimless. I was building something, slowly, stubbornly, in the shadows. But to them, because it didn't fit their template of success, it wasn't real. To them, I was reckless. To them, I was wasting time. Being the odd one out in a family of overachievers isn't just uncomfortable, it's suffocating. Every achievement of theirs felt like another weight pressing down on me. At birthdays, relatives would brag about Michael's latest case or Caroline's new promotion. When they turned to me, their voices softened, as if afraid I might break. "Hillary's still trying things," they'd say. And I would force a smile while heat crept up my neck. The worst part? I started to believe them. I began to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was the family's misstep, the one who didn't inherit the brilliance. Maybe chasing my own dream was foolish, selfish even. And yet, some stubborn part of me refused to let go. Looking back, I realize my family didn't mean to crush me. They were trapped in their own expectations, prisoners of the same pressure that drove them to succeed. They thought they were helping me by nudging me toward their definition of stability. But what they never understood was that their blueprint for life was a cage to me, and I couldn't breathe inside it. So yes, I was the thorn in their side, the black sheep, the misfit who turned down job offers, who spent nights scribbling ideas in notebooks instead of building a resume. They rolled their eyes, sighed, shook their heads. I played along, let them think I was lost. All the while, I was fighting to define myself on my own terms. And that fight, the quiet, unseen battle of trying to carve a different path, that's the root of everything that happened later. That's why tonight's meeting isn't just another family gathering. It's the collision of their expectations with my truth. There's a special kind of silence that cuts deeper than words. I've lived in it my entire life, especially at family gatherings. You know those moments when everyone is laughing, sharing, interrupting each other because the stories are too good to wait? And then there's you, sitting at the table, waiting for your turn, only to be talked over like you never spoke. That was me. Always me. I remember one Christmas vividly. The table was glowing with candles, my mother's silver polished to perfection, the smell of roasted turkey heavy in the air. I was excited because I had something real to share. My company had just landed a contract with a major client, the kind of client that could shift our entire trajectory. My heart was pounding, my fork clattering softly against the plate as I tried to find the right moment. Finally, I leaned in and said, "We just signed," and that's as far as I got. My brother's voice boomed over mine, announcing some courtroom victory. Everyone clapped, glasses clinked. My words dissolved into steam rising from the mashed potatoes. Nobody asked me to finish. Nobody noticed that I had even started. That was the pattern, Thanksgiving too. The house filled with cinnamon and pumpkin, laughter echoing off the kitchen tiles. I carried a little piece of good news with me that year as well. I was burning to share it. But when the moment came, my uncle looked at me with a grin and said, "So, Hillary, still unemployed?" The room erupted in laughter. It was supposed to be lighthearted, but I felt my face flush hot. I laughed too, a thin, cracked laugh just to hide how much it stung. That label, unemployed, stuck like gum on the bottom of my shoe, no matter how far I walked or how hard I tried to shake it off. The worst came at my sister's wedding. The music was soft, strings humming while guests filled their glasses. Caroline was radiant, glowing under the lights, and I was proud of her. But pride turned bitter when her best friend introduced me to a circle of strangers. "This is Hillary, the one still experimenting with little projects." The words were sugar-coated, but I heard what they really meant. A failure, dressed up as a curiosity. I smiled, nodded, and excused myself to the bathroom, where I locked the stall and stared at my reflection under fluorescent lights. My lipstick was perfect, but my eyes betrayed me. They looked tired, invisible. Moments like these pile up. They don't shout, they whisper. And those whispers follow you home. They curl into your pillow at night. They sit at the foot of your bed in the morning. They convince you that maybe you really are nothing more than the caricature your family draws of you, the daughter who never figured it out, the girl who kept chasing ideas instead of stability. But here's the cruelest part. I wasn't failing. I wasn't lost. I was out there grinding harder than they knew, pitching to investors, coding at 2 a.m, losing contracts and chasing the next, holding my breath through payroll weeks where every cent mattered. Yet in the eyes of my family, all of that was invisible, because success only counted if it looked like theirs: a steady paycheck, a polished title, a story they could brag about without pausing to understand it. Do you know how it feels to be erased while still sitting in the room? To open your mouth and feel the words bounce off a wall of indifference. To smile while your stomach knots itself into ropes. That's the life I lived. And each time it happened, a small part of me folded inward, pressed down, disappeared. I became the invisible daughter. And yet, invisibility does something strange. It sharpens your edges. It forces you to carry your own belief when no one else will. Every dismissal became fuel. Every laugh turned into fire in my lungs. I promised myself that one day I wouldn't need to beg for their attention. The truth would be undeniable. So I sat quietly through holidays. I swallowed their jokes. I absorbed their pity, and I kept working. Because deep down, I knew a day would come when the silence would finally break. Not because they let me speak, but because the truth would roar louder than their assumptions. On the surface, I looked like the family failure. But behind closed doors, I was living a double life. Every morning, while my parents imagined me sleeping in or wasting time, I was already on my second cup of bitter coffee, hunched over a laptop sketching out the bones of a company that would one day protect the digital world. I founded a cybersecurity startup. Not glamorous, not easy to brag about over holiday dinner, but it was mine. The beginning was brutal. I started in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a desk that wobbled if I leaned too hard on it. I worked 14, sometimes 16 hours a day, chasing a dream no one believed in but me. Investors turned me down. Friends asked if I had a backup plan. My family? They never even knew what I was doing. To them, I was between jobs. But inside that silence, I was fighting battles they couldn't imagine. The day I landed my first seed funding felt like breathing after being underwater. $5 million, Series A. I remember holding the term sheet in my shaking hands, the letters swimming in front of my eyes because I hadn't slept in 2 days. I signed, and it was as if the walls around me shifted. Suddenly, the impossible looked possible. With that money, I built a team, not just employees, fighters, engineers, analysts, dreamers who believed that security wasn't just software, it was survival in a world full of threats. Soon there were over 100 of us, crammed into an office that buzzed with energy, whiteboards filled with diagrams, empty pizza boxes stacked in corners, the sound of keyboards rattling like rain. We celebrated small wins with cheap champagne. We grieved losses together. And we kept building. Every milestone was a war we survived. Every contract signed was proof we weren't crazy. But through all of it, my family remained in the dark. They didn't see the nights I slept on the office couch or the mornings I stood in front of a mirror rehearsing pitches until my throat was raw. They didn't know about the boardroom battles where I defended my vision against people twice my age with triple my arrogance. They weren't there when a client's entire system went dark, and my team and I pulled a 36-hour marathon to bring it back. And maybe that was the hardest part, to live 2 lives. In one, I was the invisible daughter, pitied, dismissed, laughed at. In the other, I was a founder, a leader, carrying the weight of an entire company on my shoulders. Those 2 identities never touched. I kept them apart deliberately, like oil and water, because I couldn't bear to share my victories with people who'd only see them as temporary detours before I got serious. Every time my mother asked if I needed help paying rent, I smiled and said, "I'm fine." And the truth? I had just signed a lease on a penthouse my parents didn't even know existed. When my father sighed and suggested I try teaching, I nodded politely, while my company prepared to roll out a product that would secure millions of users worldwide. When my siblings teased me at Thanksgiving, I swallowed the words sitting on my tongue. We just hit 8 figures in revenue this quarter. I carried those secrets like armor. Heavy, yes, but necessary. Because until the time was right, the world I built had to stay hidden. Exposing it too soon would only invite more doubt, more dismissals, more of that suffocating silence. So I fought in the shadows. I bled in silence. And all the while, the invisible daughter they thought they knew was disappearing. The truth is, every achievement I made was sharper because it was unseen. Every late night coded into my DNA. Every pitch rejection stitched into my skin. And every win became my private rebellion. One day, I told myself, the scales would tip. One day, I wouldn't have to hide. That day was closer than anyone realized. The message came in on a gray Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a notification from our family group chat. 3 words blinked back at me. Emergency meeting tonight. My heart stopped for a second. Not because I didn't know what it was about. I knew exactly what it was about. To them, everything about me was an emergency. My so-called joblessness, my refusal to follow the safe path they carved out, my stubborn silence. I opened the chat, and there it was, a flurry of messages, each one dripping with pity disguised as love. My brother, the lawyer, had already taken it upon himself to help, and when he attached a PDF, pages of job listings, receptionist, administrative assistant, customer service trainee. Each one felt like a slap. It was as if he believed the pinnacle of my life could be answering phones at the front desk of someone else's company. He even wrote, "These could be good stepping stones, nothing to be ashamed of." Then my mother chimed in. Her words stung in that special way only a parent's can. Sweetie, you don't have to carry this weight alone. Don't be embarrassed. Your father and I have been paying your rent all this time. We can keep helping until you get back on your feet. Rent. My chest tightened, heat rising up my neck. They thought they were paying my rent? I was living in a penthouse downtown, one I signed for under my company's name. I hadn't asked them for a single dollar since I was 23. But here they were, believing in some fiction they'd written for themselves, that I was this fragile bird they had to keep alive. I stared at their words, my thumb hovering over the screen. A mix of emotions churned. Anger, humiliation, sorrow. Anger that they reduced me to this caricature of failure. Humiliation that they thought I'd quietly accepted their handouts. Sorrow because, after all these years, they still didn't know me at all. The group chat kept buzzing. My sister added a note. Hillary, there's no shame in starting over. Everyone does it. Maybe this will be good for you. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. She was sitting in her high-rise office in Midtown, analyzing spreadsheets, convinced she understood the trajectory of my life better than I did. That moment felt like the breaking point. All the years of being dismissed at dinner tables, of being spoken about as if I wasn't in the room, of being laughed off for chasing a dream they couldn't fathom, it all crystallized into this one thread of messages. They had decided collectively who I was, and they were wrong. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the cold marble counter, letting the fury settle into something sharper, colder. They wanted a meeting? Fine, I'd give them one. But this time, I wouldn't be the one standing in the corner, shrinking under their expectations. This time, I would let the truth speak for itself. And still, beneath all the fire in me, there was this ache. Because every message, every suggestion, every so-called offer of help, it wasn't just about jobs or rent. It was about how little they believed in me, how quick they were to assume the worst, how eager they were to swoop in and fix me, instead of ever once asking, Hillary, what have you built? What are you proud of? I scrolled back through the chat one last time before turning my phone face down. The words blurred together. Emergency, job search, rent, starting over. They thought this was my rock bottom. What they didn't know was that I was standing on top of the mountain, waiting for them to finally look up. That night's meeting would not be about them saving me. It would be about the truth, breaking through their delusion like glass shattering. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what they thought. I was ready. When the storm of family messages finally went quiet, I sat there with my phone in my hand, my pulse pounding in my ears. The words, emergency meeting tonight, still glowed on the screen. I knew what was coming. A room filled with pity, disappointment, and thinly veiled lectures about how I'd failed at life. They were going to corner me, judge me, try to rescue me from a fall I never had. And then, like a spark in the darkness, an idea struck me. I didn't need to argue with them. I didn't need to scream or prove myself. The truth would do that for me, but it needed to be delivered at the perfect moment in the perfect way. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Maya's number. Maya, my assistant, my right hand, the person who knew every detail of my company and this deal that had just rewritten my life. My voice shook a little as I whispered to myself, "This is it. This is how I'll do it." She answered on the first ring. "Hillary?" Her voice was bright, steady, grounding. "Maya," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I need a favor. Tonight, I'm going to be with my family. They think I'm unemployed." I almost choked on the word.
At exactly 7:15, I want you to call me. Loud, clear, no hesitation.
"Tell me the news about the acquisition. Tell me everything. The 1.5 billion, the employees being retained, my continuing role as CEO. Spell it out like you're reading a headline to the world. For a second, there was silence. Then Maya laughed softly, not mockingly, but in disbelief. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Yes. I exhaled, my fingers tightening around the phone. They've painted a version of me that isn't real. They've convinced themselves I'm some lost child they need to save. But the truth? I don't need saving. And I want them to hear it from someone who isn't me, so they can't twist it into another one of their stories. Maya's tone shifted, serious now. Consider it done. At 7:15 sharp, I'll call, and I'll make sure every word lands like thunder. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The living room filled with their judgmental faces, the air heavy with scripted disappointment. And then, my phone buzzing, my voice calm as I answered. Maya's words cutting through the room like a lightning strike. I imagined their eyes widening, their hands stilling, their world tilting. It gave me a strange sense of peace. Still, beneath that peace was a current of nerves. What if they brushed it off? What if they twisted even this into something ugly? But no, this wasn't speculation. This was fact. Unshakable, undeniable fact. I whispered to Maya, "Thank you. Tonight will be the first time they'll actually see me." We hung up, and I sat in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second carrying me closer to the confrontation. I could almost feel the weight of the evening pressing down already. But instead of dread, there was this quiet anticipation building in my chest, a kind of electricity. 7:15. That number lodged itself in my brain. A countdown had begun, and I was the only one who knew it. My family thought they were planning an intervention. What they didn't realize was that they'd scheduled the moment that would shatter their illusion forever. And I wasn't going to stop it. I'll never forget the way the air felt when I pushed open the heavy oak door to my parents' living room that night. It was thick, charged, like the quiet before a storm. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the city lights. The lamps were dimmed, casting long shadows across the rug. And the furniture had been rearranged. The couches, usually scattered casually around the room, had been pulled into a rigid formation, a semicircle, facing one empty chair in the center. My chair. It looked less like a family meeting and more like a courtroom, or an intervention. My father was standing by the fireplace, papers in his hand, his reading glasses low on his nose. He looked like a judge, about to deliver a verdict. My mother sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her lips pressed so tightly together they were almost white. And my brother and sister, each with folders and printouts stacked neatly in their laps, looked like prosecutors preparing their opening statements. I stepped forward slowly, the sound of my heels against the hardwood echoing louder than I expected. For a second, I wondered if they could hear my heart too, hammering in my chest. "Hillary," my father said, not warmly, not even neutrally. It was the same tone he used when talking to patients who refused to follow medical advice. "Sit down, we need to talk." I lowered myself into the lone chair, its position making it impossible to ignore the staging. I was on trial. My father cleared his throat and unfolded his paper. His voice carried the practiced weight of authority. "Your mother and I, along with your siblings, have been concerned for quite some time. You are 33 years old. You have no stable job, no clear career path, no direction. We can't stand by and watch you continue down this unproductive road." The words landed heavy, but I stayed quiet. My hands rested on my knees, my nails digging into my palms out of sight. Then my brother leaned forward, sliding a few pages across the coffee table toward me. I printed out some job listings, he said, almost smug. Administrative roles, receptionist positions, something to get you back on track, at least until you figure out what you really want to do with your life. The absurdity nearly made me laugh, but the lump in my throat held it back. His tone wasn't malicious, it was worse. It was patronizing. He believed this was kindness. My sister chimed in next, her voice sweet but sharp. Hillary, we're not here to attack you. We're here to help. It's not too late to turn things around. You just need to be realistic. Then my mother spoke, her voice breaking for the first time. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. Sweetie, you don't have to be ashamed. Your father and I have been covering your rent. We've kept it quiet so you wouldn't feel embarrassed. But it's time to stop pretending. You can't go on like this. Her words sliced deeper than any of the others. Covering my rent? They truly believed I was being propped up by their charity, that without them I'd be drowning. The reality that I had signed a lease on a penthouse and paid it outright from my own earnings was so far from their imagination it bordered on comedy. But I didn't laugh. I didn't argue. I didn't reveal my hand. I just sat there, absorbing every accusation, every misguided attempt at rescue. Because I knew something they didn't. In less than an hour, the phone in my pocket would ring, and when it did, their entire script would collapse. For now, though, I played the role they'd cast me in. The wayward daughter, the lost cause, the project in need of saving. Inside, though, I was a storm waiting to break. Silence can be louder than any word. That night, in that living room staged like a courtroom, I discovered the sharp edge of silence. My father's voice droned on, weighted with disappointment, punctuated by the rustle of his notes. My brother leaned forward, tapping the stack of job listings like they were evidence. My sister sighed dramatically, as if she were already tired of carrying me, and my mother, her hands twisted in her lap, her eyes full of pity, as though she were watching me drown. I sat there, perfectly still, my hands folded together, my expression unreadable. If they had looked closer, they might have noticed the way my nails dug into my palms, leaving half-moon marks in my skin. But they didn't look. They never looked. They only spoke, judged, decided. The weight of their words pressed against me. But instead of shrinking, I let it wash over me. I became a witness in my own trial, watching the spectacle unfold. Inside, though, the truth pulsed like a heartbeat. They think I can't pay rent. They think I'm barely scraping by. Just yesterday, I signed the deed to a penthouse apartment, paid for in full. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Mostly, I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I let the silence do the talking. Every insult, every misguided attempt to save me only tightened the knot in my stomach. The irony was unbearable. My brother slid another sheet of paper toward me.
Look, Hillary, this receptionist role pays decently. It could be a good place to start. Nothing to be ashamed of. Everyone has to start somewhere.
His voice was dripping with fake encouragement, like a teacher coaxing a failing student. I stared at the page but didn't touch it. My mind flicked to the faces of my employees, the engineers, the analysts, the interns who looked to me for leadership. Over 100 people building something that mattered, something that defended corporations against cyber threats. They knew who I was. They respected me. And yet here, in my family's living room, I was reduced to someone unworthy of even a receptionist's desk. I swallowed hard, my jaw tight. My mother's voice trembled as she spoke again. Hillary, please, don't be proud. Your father and I have been quietly paying for your apartment because we didn't want you to feel humiliated. But this can't go on. Those words nearly broke me. Paying for my apartment? The sheer absurdity of it. Where did they think the checks they mailed were going? To me, it was nothing more than a strange fantasy they had spun for themselves. The truth was, I hadn't needed a dime from them in years. Still, I let her believe it. I let them all believe it, because soon, the silence would break in a way none of them expected. As my father continued, I drifted inward. My mind replayed the signing of my penthouse lease, the weight of the pen in my hand, the hum of city traffic below the towering glass windows. The moment the contract slid across the table, stamped and finalized, that was my reality. Yet here, in this suffocating living room, it was invisible. And that invisibility cut deeper than the accusations themselves. They hadn't asked. Not once in years. They assumed. They filled the silence with their own narratives. Failure, shame, dependence. They built a story about me without ever inviting me to speak. So I stayed quiet, because I knew what they didn't. In less than 15 minutes, the phone in my pocket would ring. A voice would speak, clear and undeniable, and every assumption they'd piled on me would come crashing down. For now, my silence was my shield. My silence was my weapon. And as they circled me with pity and condescension, I sat like a stone in the river, unmoved, waiting for the tide to turn. Time has a way of slowing down when everyone's eyes are on you. That living room was thick with judgment, every second stretching out like a rubber band pulled too tight. My father was still talking, reciting his speech about wasted potential and responsibility. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, sighing as if she carried the weight of my supposed failures on her shoulders. My siblings shuffled papers, job listings, recommendations, instructions for how to get back on my feet. And then it happened. The faint buzz in my pocket, that familiar vibration that cut through every heavy word in the air. I knew what it was. I'd been waiting for it. I slid my hand into my jacket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with a name, Maya, my assistant, my ally, my secret weapon. I pressed accept and put it on speaker. My voice was calm, steady. "Hey, Maya, you're on speaker." The entire room went silent. My father's lecture froze mid-sentence. My brother frowned, as if I'd just committed some kind of crime by interrupting the trial. But my sister crossed her arms, bracing herself for what she assumed would be another embarrassment. But then Maya's voice filled the room, clear and unwavering. "Hillary, I just wanted to confirm, the acquisition closed. The transfer has gone through. The valuation finalized at $1.5 billion. All 280 employees are secure, and the board is thrilled you'll remain as CEO moving forward." For a moment, the world held its breath. I looked up. My father's mouth was slightly open, his papers trembling in his hand. My mother's tissue dropped to her lap. My brother blinked hard as if trying to process a foreign language, and my sister, her lips parted in disbelief, the color draining from her face. The silence was louder than any outburst. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Maya continued, unaware of the earthquake she had just caused. "Congratulations again, Hillary. This is historic. Everyone here is proud of you." And then the line clicked off. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to sit in it, to feel it press against their skin the way their judgment had pressed against mine for years. The phone still warm in my hand felt like a gavel striking down, ending a trial that had never been fair to begin with. Inside, my chest swelled with something sharp, relief, vindication, maybe even sorrow, because this was what it took, billion-dollar proof for my own family to see me, to finally stop doubting who I was. I scanned their faces one by one. My father's sternness cracked. My mother's pity curdled into shame. My siblings, usually so smug, sat in stunned silence. The walls of certainty they had built around my life collapsed in seconds. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I didn't rub it in. I just sat there, still and silent, letting the truth echo louder than any defense I could have spoken. The truth had finally spoken for me. The room was still vibrating with the echo of Maya's words. $1.5 billion. It hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. My family sat frozen, their mouths half open, their eyes darting between each other as if someone would wake them from this nightmare or dream. But it wasn't either. It was real, and it was mine. I felt the weight of my phone in my hand. The same device they probably thought I used to scroll aimlessly through job boards or waste time on social media. Tonight, it was more powerful than any gavel in a courtroom. Slowly, deliberately, I stood. My chair creaked, the sound cutting through the thick silence. I walked to the coffee table where the stack of job listings still sat. Pages upon pages my siblings had so carefully printed, highlighted, annotated. Receptionist jobs, assistant positions, entry-level office roles, a life they thought fit me better than the one I had built. I placed the phone right on top of the stack. The screen was still glowing faintly from the call. The sound it made, thud, wasn't loud, but it was final, like a door closing, like a verdict delivered. Then I looked up. I met my father's eyes first. For years, those eyes had been sharp scalpels, cutting through me with disapproval, dissecting me down to nothing. Tonight, they wavered. His hand twitched, gripping the armrest as though the world had tilted beneath him. Next, my mother. She had always worn pity like a perfume, subtle, constant, suffocating. Now her lips trembled as if she were the one on trial. Then my brother, still holding a packet of job opportunities. TSPHT, his knuckles had gone white, his jaw clenched. The arrogance that usually curled his mouth was gone, replaced by something raw. Disbelief. Finally, my sister. Her face, usually perfect with practiced confidence, had cracked. She stared at me like I was a stranger who had just walked into her house. I let my gaze linger on each of them, one by one, and then I spoke. My entire life I've been sitting at this table, waiting for you to look at me, not with pity, not with disdain, just to see me. And for 5 years, while I was building something bigger than I could have dreamed, you never once asked. You only judged. You never wondered if maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was doing. Instead, you sat here and handed me job listings, as if that was all I was capable of. My voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. It was steady, heavy with all the words I had swallowed over the years. I leaned forward slightly, my palms pressing against the table. You called me here tonight to talk about failure, but the truth is, you never gave me a chance to show you my success, because it was easier to believe I was nothing than to admit you were wrong. The silence that followed was electric. I could almost hear their thoughts scrambling, colliding, breaking apart. I straightened up, letting my words sink into the walls of that room, into their bones. The weight wasn't mine anymore, it was theirs to carry. And then I delivered the line I had held inside for too long, the one that burned in my chest every holiday, every family dinner, every time they looked past me. For the past 5 years, you didn't ask, you only judged. That was it. No screaming, no theatrics, just the truth, naked and undeniable. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and leaned back in my chair. The phone still sat on the pile of job listings, glowing like a torch on a funeral pyre. The old narrative of me, the jobless daughter, the family disappointment, was burning right there in front of them. And I let it burn. The moment the words left my mouth, for 5 years, you didn't ask, you only judged. It was like something inside me cracked wide open. I had spent so long swallowing my memories, burying them under silence, pretending they didn't sting. But now, standing in the middle of that living room with their shocked faces around me, the flood broke loose. One memory crashed into another, vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. Christmas dinner 3 years ago. The table glittered with silver cutlery, candles reflecting off wine glasses. My brother was bragging about some big case he'd closed. My sister rattling off numbers from her hedge fund bonus. I remember taking a breath, trying to share a little joy of my own. We'd just signed a Fortune 500 company as a client. But before I could finish the sentence, my father waved a hand. "Hillary, please, let's not bore everyone with your side projects." The room laughed politely, and my voice disappeared under the clinking of forks and knives. That same night, while they dismissed me, I was sealing a deal worth millions, Thanksgiving. The golden turkey steaming, the smell of stuffing filling the air. My aunt leaned over with her too bright smile and asked, "So, Hillary, still unemployed?" The room erupted in chuckles, even my mother giving a soft, sympathetic laugh. I smiled weakly, my cheeks burning. What I didn't tell them was that hours before dinner, I'd been on a call finalizing our Series A funding, $5 million wired into my company's account. They passed me the cranberry sauce as if I were invisible, while I was quietly changing my life. Then the wedding. My sister's perfect wedding at the country club. Champagne fountains, string quartets, white roses everywhere. I stood on the edge of the dance floor when one of her friends asked me what I did these days. Before I could answer, my sister cut in, smiling too wide. "Oh, Hillary's still experimenting with little projects here and there. She'll find her footing soon." Everyone laughed, then turned back to the dance. I held my glass tighter, my knuckles pale. What no one knew was that the night before, I had signed the lease on a penthouse office for my growing team of 100 people. I looked at them now, sitting in this same pattern of judgment, and all those moments swelled up in my chest. My voice was steady, but the images poured out of me like a dam had burst. "Do you remember that Christmas when you cut me off mid-sentence? That night I had just signed one of the biggest contracts of my life. Do you remember that Thanksgiving when you laughed and called me unemployed? That morning I had closed a funding round that put my company on the map. And at your wedding," I turned to my sister, "while you told your friends I was still lost, I had just moved my company into a penthouse office overlooking the city. Every time you tried to make me smaller, I was growing. Every time you laughed at me, I was building something you couldn't even imagine." The room went quiet. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater, a low mechanical buzz under the weight of my words. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I had cried enough times alone, driving back from family dinners with mascara streaking down my cheeks, wondering why I wasn't enough for them. Tonight wasn't about tears. Tonight was about truth. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit with the contrast between the story they had written about me and the life I had actually been living. Then I whispered, almost more to myself than to them, "You never saw me, but the world did. My employees did. Investors did. The markets did. Everyone but my own family." That was the deepest cut of all. Not their doubt, not their laughter, but their refusal to even look closely enough to notice who I was becoming. The flood of memories had left me both raw and free. The weight of years of silence had been dragged into the open, laid bare on the table with the job listings and the glowing phone. For the first time in years, I breathed easily. The silence after my words was heavy, thick, almost alive. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel, each second slicing through the room like a blade. My father sat closest to me, and for the first time in my life, his hands weren't steady. The man who had held beating hearts in his palms, who had stitched arteries with precision, was trembling. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of the chair. His lips parted, but no words came out. My mother was the first to break. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking as tears slid down her cheeks. I had seen her cry at funerals, at movies, even at my graduation. But this was different. This was raw, unguarded, almost childlike. She looked at me as if I had been a stranger all along, as if she was seeing me for the very first time. Across from her, my brother shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle pulsed in his cheek. He had always carried himself like the golden son, the one with a steady job, a wife, a house in the suburbs. But now he couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, then at the stack of job listings that still sat untouched between us. His lips moved, barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us?" And then my sister. Her reaction was sharper, darker. She leaned back, her manicured nails drumming against the glass coffee table. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned. I could almost see the questions swirling in her head. Why her? Why not me? She let out a short, bitter laugh that cracked under its own weight. "So, all this time, you were building an empire while we thought you couldn't even pay rent?" I looked at her. Steady. Calm. "Yes," I said simply. That one word seemed to pull the air out of the room again. My father finally found his voice. It came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Hillary, why didn't you tell us sooner? Why keep it from us?" I held his gaze. "Because every time I tried, you turned away. Every time I opened my mouth to share something real, you dismissed me. You didn't want to hear it. You wanted a version of me that fit your story. The lost daughter, the failure. And I let you have that story because fighting it was exhausting." My mother sobbed harder at that, covering her face with both hands. My brother shook his head, muttering something under his breath, as if trying to rewrite the past in real time. My sister's lips twisted, part envy, part disbelief. I didn't move. I just let them sit in it. The shock, the regret, the envy, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. For years, I had bent myself into silence so they could feel comfortable in their illusions. Tonight, the illusions were gone. The room felt like a courtroom with no verdict, only the undeniable evidence laid out on the table. A phone call worth $1.5 billion, a career they had mocked into invisibility, and the undeniable truth of who I had become. I looked around, slowly, meeting each of their eyes. "You wanted to hold an intervention," I said softly, "but the truth is, I was never the one who needed saving." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling out until even the air seemed to hum with their weight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was the storm that shattered their certainty, and they didn't know what to do with it. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, a weight pressing down on all of us. My father's hand still shook against the armrest. My mother's tears had slowed into quiet hiccups, and my brother and sister avoided my gaze like the floor was the only safe place left. That was the moment I realized something crystal clear. If I didn't draw the line now, they'd pull me back into the same cycle of dismissal and judgment. And I couldn't. Not anymore. I straightened my back, feeling a steadiness in me I hadn't always had. My voice came out calm, but it carried steel. "Listen," I said, cutting through the tension like a knife. "If this family is going to continue with me in it, then things have to change. The rules have to change." My mother blinked at me, as if the daughter she thought she knew would never dare to talk this way. My father leaned forward, his brows knitting, trying to process what was happening. My brother froze, his fingers tightening around the papers in his lap. My sister crossed her arms, but even that posture looked fragile. I let the silence hang for a beat, then I laid it out. If you want me here, if you want to have a relationship with me, there has to be respect. Real respect. Not the kind where you nod while secretly rolling your eyes. Not the kind where you cut me off at dinner because you think what I do isn't important. Respect that shows up as listening. Respect that shows up as taking me seriously. Respect that isn't conditional on whether I fit into the picture you painted for me years ago. The words seemed to echo. I wasn't shouting, but the truth was loud enough. My father cleared his throat, his voice trembling. Hillary, of course we respect you. I shook my head before he could finish. No, Dad. You respected the version of me you could pity. You respected me as long as I stayed in the box you built. The truth is, you never really saw me, and that ends today. My mother covered her mouth again, this time not from shock, but from guilt. My brother finally raised his eyes to mine, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. My sister, though, gave me a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. So what, now you set the terms? She asked, her tone half challenge, half disbelief. Yes, I said. Exactly that. I leaned forward slightly, my palms pressed against my knees. If you want to move forward with me, it comes with one condition: respect and real listening. No more judgment dressed as advice. No more silence when I share something meaningful. If you can't do that, then you don't get access to me. It's that simple. The air grew colder, heavier. My brother's lips parted, then closed again, as if he wanted to protest but couldn't find a single reason I was wrong. My father looked away, out the window, searching for words that weren't there. My mother nodded slowly, tears shining in her eyes, as if she finally understood just how deep the wound went. And then, one by one, came the responses. My mother whispered, "I can do that. I can try." My father gave a short, shaky nod, though he didn't speak. My brother exhaled hard, rubbed his temples, then muttered, "Okay." But my sister stayed silent. Her jaw was tight, her eyes sharp, her silence speaking louder than any words could. And that was fine. Because this time, I wasn't begging for approval. I wasn't chasing after their acceptance like scraps from the table. For the first time in years, I wasn't the powerless one in the room. I had redrawn the boundaries of who I allowed into my space, my heart, my story, and whether they stepped across with respect or chose to stay behind, that choice was theirs, not mine. I leaned back, breathing easier than I had all night. "So," I said quietly, almost to myself, "this is how it begins." The next morning, the city felt different. Maybe it was just me, but even the hum of Manhattan outside my window carried a new rhythm. The cab horns didn't sound impatient, they sounded alive. The coffee cart guy downstairs gave me my cappuccino with a smile that lasted a second longer than usual, like he already knew. And maybe he did. Because by the time I sat down with my laptop, the headlines were everywhere. $1.5 billion cybersecurity acquisition shakes the market. Hillary Evans, quiet founder to stay on as CEO. From underdog to industry leader, the deal of the year, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, TechCrunch. Every outlet I used to read in silence, wondering if my name would ever be more than a footnote, was now carrying my story front and center. And for the first time, I didn't have to prove anything. The proof was right there, plastered across front pages and trending hashtags. I scrolled slowly, almost in disbelief. My face, my company's logo, the smiling team photo we'd taken after our first product launch, all of it was out there now. No more hiding, no more invisibility cloak stitched by years of family doubt. Then the messages started flooding in. My inbox was on fire. Former classmates who hadn't spoken to me in a decade, angel investors who had once passed with a polite, "It's not the right time," even ex-boyfriends who thought they'd check in. They all wanted a piece of the spotlight now, but those weren't the messages that mattered. The ones that made me stop, that made me tear up right there at my kitchen counter, were from my team, my people. "Hillary, I can't stop crying. Thank you for fighting for us. My kids will have their college funds because of this bonus. I don't have words. You always believed in us, even when we doubted ourselves. Today proves you were right." I read each one slowly, letting the words sink in, because while my family had doubted me, dismissed me, erased me, this team had chosen to trust me, to follow me, and today they were being rewarded for that trust. By noon, we held a company-wide meeting on Zoom. I watched as squares filled with faces I had seen tired, stressed, worn down from late nights and endless iterations, now glowed with something else entirely. Relief, joy, pride. Some were laughing, some were wiping tears, some were holding champagne flutes even though it was barely lunchtime. I started to speak, but before I could, one of my engineers, quiet, brilliant, the kind who usually stayed in the background, unmuted himself and said, "Hillary, we just want to say thank you." And then the screen erupted. Clapping, cheering, people unmuting all at once. My Slack pinged with fireworks emojis. Someone held up a handmade sign that read, "In Hillary we trust." I had to bite my lip to keep my voice steady. "No," I told them, shaking my head with a smile. "Thank you. You made this real. I may have founded the company, but you built it. You are the reason we got here, and you're the reason we'll keep going." There was a moment where I just sat back and let the applause wash over me. And that's when it hit me. The contrast. Last night, I was standing in a living room where every word was doubt. Every glance was dismissal. Today, I was surrounded, digitally, physically, emotionally, by people who believed. People who celebrated, people who knew my worth without me having to shout for it. That was the difference between being tolerated and being valued, between family that couldn't see me and a team that always had. When the call ended, I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the sunlight spilling through the window. My phone buzzed again, another news alert, another congratulatory text, but I didn't rush to check it. For once, I let myself just feel it. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years was gone. And here's the part I'll never forget. It wasn't the billion-dollar number that felt like victory. It wasn't even the headlines. It was the faces of my team, wet with tears, laughing through champagne, hugging their kids in the background. That was the real win. That was the moment I knew. Everything I had endured, every eye roll at Thanksgiving, every whisper of jobless, every time I swallowed my truth instead of screaming it, had been worth it. The world had always told me success was about money, titles, prestige. But that morning, in the aftermath of the storm, I understood something deeper. Success is when the people you lead feel seen, safe, and proud to stand beside you. And in that moment, I realized I had finally been seen, too. For years, I thought my worth lived in the shadows of other people's approval. I waited for nods, for praise, for the kind of validation that would make me feel like I finally belonged in my own family. But here's the truth that burned its way into me after everything that happened. I don't need their approval. I never did. I remember looking at myself in the mirror that night after the meeting. My reflection was the same face I'd seen every day. Tired eyes, a trace of worry, but something was different. Behind the familiar lines, there was a steadiness I hadn't seen before, a strength, the kind of quiet power that comes when you've walked through fire and finally realized the flames can't touch you anymore. So let me say it out loud, not just to them, but to myself. I am not defined by who chooses to see me. My value isn't measured by who claps when I win, or who rolls their eyes when I try. My worth is built on the sweat, the sleepless nights, the risks I took when no one believed in me. It's carved from resilience, not applause. And maybe that's the lesson buried in all of this. Family can love you and still not understand you. Friends can cheer you on and still not get what drives you. The world can doubt you right up until the moment it doesn't. So if you're listening to this right now, if you've ever been called lazy while secretly working yourself to the bone, if you've ever been dismissed as failing while you were quietly building something that mattered, then hear me clearly. You are not alone. I stood in that room surrounded by people who thought they knew me, and I realized something vital. Their vision of me was small because that's all they chose to see. But I'm not small. I never was, and neither are you. I think of all the times I wanted to scream, "Look at me, I'm doing it, I'm making something real." But the silence, as painful as it was, taught me something better. It taught me to build for myself, to keep my head down and prove it, not with words, but with results. That's a kind of freedom I wouldn't trade for anything. So yes, I sold my company for $105 billion. Yes, I'm still CEO. But more than that, I am whole. With or without their recognition, with or without their pride. And if tomorrow every headline disappeared, every dollar vanished, every company folded, I'd still be here, standing in my truth. And now I want to turn this to you, the person listening, the person watching. Tell me, when was the last time you were misunderstood? When was the last time you had to swallow your truth because no one around you was ready to hear it? Share it, because when you do, you take back power. You take back your story. And maybe, just maybe, you give someone else the courage to keep going too. So if this resonates, drop your story in the comments. Let's build a space where being underestimated becomes the spark, not the shame. And if you found even a sliver of yourself in my journey, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the reminder. You don't need permission to be valuable. Because at the end of the day, the greatest victory isn't the billion-dollar deal, or the headlines, or even the applause. The greatest victory is this: standing firm, unshaken in who you are. I am Hillary Evans. I'm not jobless. I'm not invisible. I am enough. Always was, always will be.